Hi guys, Sugar here with a new video, and this video will be my 2v2 ultimate tier list video for Dragonflight, so season 1. It's still the start of the season, so you can still catch up and have a lot of fun. Mid-season will be probably mid-January, third week of January, and I will probably update this tier list. I've made a mistake with my 3v3 video, so I made a melee tier list, and I think it would have been better to just do all the archetypes together. So I might just remake that video later down the line. But what I want to do is now 2v2 ultimate tier list. You have everything, ranged, melees, and healers. And I don't want to make you wait for multiple days or like multiple weeks to actually have the full picture of that bracket. So now we are going to do the 2v2 bracket, and we will down the line redo the 3v3 bracket in 1 week or something like that. With all the archetypes together. But anyways, let's start right away. I'm going to explain the tier list. I've put all the tanks into the tank tier. It doesn't mean that it is the D tier. It just means that I have like no knowledge to actually put it in anywhere from S, A, B, C, or D tier. It could be very strong, but it could be also very bad. And that's why I'm going to give you the chance to say that in the comments. If you feel like there is a OP tank out there in 2v2, just tell them to the people in the comments. But myself, I don't know which one are OP or not. So S tier means that it's God tier. A tier, it means that it is meta. B tier, it means that it's good or average. Depends on how you see it. For me, B tier is actually the good tier. C tier means that it is underpowered, and D tier, it means that it is garbage. Doo-doo, like I say in all my videos. Big disclaimer, it is my opinion. Not everyone will be happy from A to Z. It's very hard to actually make a full-on tier list for every archetype, for every spec. And if you are in disagreement with me, please let me know in the comments, and we are going to debate on it. I'm always going to give an explanation behind every tier, every class that I put or spec that I put in a tier list, so you can also understand. But there will be also timestamps where you can jump. I will do class by class basis, so it's also easier to do timestamps for it. So let's talk directly about Warlocks, and I'm going to be very controversial. Not for the first spec. I think Demonology is pretty much S tier. Everyone can agree it's very tanky, very annoying. You cannot kill the pet anymore. Before you could do that in Shadowlands. Now it's not possible, or at least it's not worth it to do that, because you will take a shit ton of damage, and at one point you will just lose the game. They have a moral strike effect, which is something very rare for a caster to have. There is Shadow Priest that has that. There is Demonology that has that. I'm thinking who has that. Of course, Marksmanship Hunter with their Raptor, but that's not really a casting ability, right? Unholy DK, no, not Unholy DK, that there are melees, but Destruction Warlocks has that too via PvP talent, but it's a bit clunky since it's like a zone, so it's not on the target itself. SP, of course, Shadow Priest. I think I already said that. Am I missing something? Like a more strike effects on a character? I don't think so. So there is like a few casters that have that, and just because of that, it is also very annoying to heal through it in 2v2 with the high dampening. All in all, it's a very strong class that has spec that has actually a lot of damage to propose. I might maybe one day make a guide about it, but I feel like it's the most played spec out there, so I feel like there is a lot of like guides about it. Well, for example, I made a guide for Destruction Warlock. I'm going to judge it right now. Destruction Warlock in 2s is underpowered. I might say even D tier, but I'm going to keep it for the real bad ones. It is a C tier spec because basically all their damage is lineable. It is not... It's actually your fault if you're dying in the middle of the map because of Destruction Warlock. Of course, if they do double DPS, it's a bit different, because they can also play with a Shadow Priest, and then it's a bit more difficult to play against. But it's not because of the Destruction Warlock, it's more about the synergy with a Warlock and a Shadow Priest that makes it a bit difficult to play against. But I feel like if the Destruction Warlock plays with a healer, which he should normally to get the best result, let's say with a Holy Priest to get a stun, or a Holy Paladin to get Bob, for example, or Resto Shaman to be super aggressive, it's still difficult to land kills. Versus a Demon Hunter, he will just stick on you and you will not be able to cast. Versus any other melees, like for example Unholy DK, it's very hard to actually get a kill, first and foremost, but also they have a lot of pressure. Versus rogues, really depends on your trinket, depends on your ally if he can peel you off, and their demons are actually more killable than those of Demonology. So if you're playing with a succubus out, he can just get cleaved and or she gets cleaved, and then pretty much you play with it without a demon. So I don't know, I'm not really, I'm liking destruction in 3v3, also in solo shuffle, but in 2v2 it's really not a bracket for the destruction warlock. I think all the warlocks can agree on that. Affliction warlock, I'm going to be honest, I'm leaning towards A tier, but because people don't know how to play against. But in my opinion, if people know what they can do versus an Affliction Warlock, you can put it in B tier. There's also a lot of melees that actually can destroy an Affliction Warlock without any problem. A Fury Warrior, a Arms Warrior can just remove it with Wrecking Throw, like the Dark Pact. Unholy DKs are pretty much unkillable for an Affliction Warlock normally. The best results for an Affliction Warlock should be with a Shadow Priest. So if you're playing with a Shadow Priest, you can have a lot of pressure, and it is the job of the Shadow Priest to actually keep you alive, and vice versa. There is some saving grace there, that's why it's A tier, but really it's not the best caster in 2v2, and if it feels a bit clunky because again you need to dampen the enemy team. But it's also very hard because a Fury Warrior can just destroy you, or a Demon Hunter can also destroy you. Some Hunters can be very annoying, although Kremlin Stratagem is now gone, so that's a bit more easy to play against, but it's still going to be a very hard matchup. So you have hard matchups, but I think it's one of the most meta casters out there, so that's why it's an A tier spec. Now let's talk about mages right now. So you could say that mages are not that great in twos, but they have great comps. So Rogue Mage, for example, which is probably the most prominent mage spec, mage comp out there. For Arcane and for Fire Mage, for example, Frost Mages are more about like dampen the enemy team with a healer and try to get a kill, to score a kill with that. You can do some big glacial spikes and probably win because of that. But I'm going to judge first and foremost Frost Mages, and I think it's the same as Destruction Warlock. They just get lines whenever they have CDs, and whenever they don't have CDs, they are caught to be actually running away all the time to actually survive damage. And just because of that, for me, it's a C tier spec. But it doesn't mean that you cannot climb with it. C tier doesn't mean that you cannot climb with it. It just becomes more hard for you to climb with. And you should also see a tier list based on that. So whenever you see a C tier spec, it doesn't mean that it's really garbage. It just means that it's very hard to actually climb with it because it's not good in 2v2. And also most classes that are in C tier in 2v2 are kind of good in 3v3 because they have more synergies, because they have more comps available, and because the gameplay is a bit different in 3v3 than in 2v2. Now, let's talk about a spec that actually does well in 2v2. It is Arcane Mages, and for me it's the same as Affliction Warlock. It's one of the most meta classes out there. They have great comps. Rogue Mage, Arcane Mages are actually very good in Rogue Mage now, since it's kind of like a Fire Mage disguised into arcane power, really. They have Ghosts with Arcane Surge. They can have a lot of clarity, not clarity, but clear casting stacks and then go for a burst. You have Arcane Barrage, basically an execute effect, which is super good for an Assassination Rogue or a Subtlety Rogue in twos. Really, it's one of the best classes out there, but it's basically going to be locked into a Rogue Mage comp. If you play with a healer, it's a bit more dampened. You're going to win a few matchups and then you're going to lose a lot of matchups because of just the inherent matchup, which is melee versus casters in 2v2, which is very hard for the caster to actually survive, because you need external help to actually be able to cast multiple abilities. That's why 3v3 casters are very good in 3v3 if they play caster cleaves, but in 2v2 you have to play either super greedy with a double DPS comp, with a Shadow Priest generally, or maybe sometimes with an Elemental Shaman or whatever you can actually play. You can also play with a Warlock. Or you can play super safe, but then it's very dampened, and you will see that some games are very annoying to win just because of people can just line your damage, and if they're smart, they just run away whenever you have your burst, and then they go back in because then you have nothing and you're going to hit like a wet noodle. Now let's talk about Fire Mage. I think Fire Mage is just better in twos than a Frost Mage. It's good because you still have combat goes, you can still win 2v2 with a Rogue Mage. You can say that you're pretty much locked in into one comp, but that one comp is still got you. If you have communication, you have like the good old Discord, you're going to set up a kill any point in the game. It's still more hard than the Shadowlands because your Blazing Barrier is nerfed since Shadowlands. You don't have Fiery Soul, I don't know how it's called anymore. Blazing Soul from the talents from Shadowlands, so you don't have that anymore. The triple shields is also not there, but now your combat is not dispellable, so you have some saving grace like here and there. Still a good spec or average spec depending on how you see B tier. For me it means that it's good, and I think Fire Mage is not as bad as people would say in twos. In threes maybe there's some debate, because I can see why, because it's very squishy. But in twos, squishiness is not really the most important thing. I think good coordination with a sub-rogue, for example, can just let you win in the opener if you're doing well, and then the second go you generally have a kill if the sub-rogue plays it correctly. But that's pretty much my analysis for mages. Now let's talk about warriors. And you know, I make arms warrior guides, and people know me for at least playing arms and sometimes warlocks and sometimes priests like this priest and such. And I might be biased, but I think arms warrior is not as bad as people would think in twos. In twos you have a healer, you can sustain a lot of damage. It's not my favorite bracket, that's why I'm not playing a lot of twos, at least with my arms warrior, but it is actually feeling good. And I think just because of that, I think people will tell me that it's not true, but for me it's a meta spec. Arms, because you can play Fatality, and I already did a 80k Fatality, which is normally a talent that gets activated by an execute under 30% health, because you are stacking it with more strikes above 30% health. If they drop from beneath 30% and they get executed with a 7th or 8th stacks Fatality, often than not it nets your kill. It's very reliable. The only hardest part is to make them drop underneath 30%, but that's why you should play with an aggressive healer. That can be, let's say, a Holy Priest, a Disc Priest. To be honest, a Holy Paladin could work, but the problem is some matchups might be difficult. But my best healer would be the Resto Shaman. A Resto Shaman gives you the agency to trust in him, and whenever they have Stormkeeper, you can go for a Fatality, and whenever you have the Fatality, the people are just going to die. And the only problem you can have with Fatality is actually playing versus Holy Paladins, but luckily Holy Paladins are not really the most played healers at the moment in twos, because they get countered by a lot of specs. So I think all in all, Arms Warrior is actually doing alright. I think both specs are doing alright. I think in twos the same Fury and Arms are quite the same, because it functions the same. The more strike is more reliable now for Arms Warrior. Fury Warriors has a lot of high consistent burst. I think the burst damage personally from Arms is higher than Fury, but the burst damage from Fury is more often, so it depends on how you want to play. Personally, I prefer Arms, and I rate them both as meta because they can destroy their enemies easily. Double DPS comps easily dead versus you. I think the only matchup that is difficult is Rogue Mage, but if you're playing with a Resto Shaman, Rogue Mage is not a difficult matchup anymore. You have Grounding Totem, you have multiple totems to actually survive. They don't really like to destroy totems like Subtlety Rogues and Fire Mages because they expend a lot of resources to actually kill them. Shadowy Duel gets countered by, again, Spirit League Totem. Multiple totems can actually heal through Shadowy Duel. So I really win all my Rogue Mage matchups whenever I'm playing Resto Shaman with a Resto Shaman. So that's why for me it's an 8-tier spec. And Fury Warriors is quite the same, really. It's the same, but a different style of gameplay. It's easier to play Fury Warriors versus casters, but then again, casters are not the most popular specs out there in 2v2. So that advantage is a bit lost. While, for example, Arms Warrior versus a Demon Hunter or a DK, you do die by the sword, you're pretty much invincible. You're not going to die, and you will have pressure. You have also Disarm, which is super big versus a few specs. Your enemy is basically Assassination Rogue as an Arms Warrior, and Fury Warriors, I think, gets eaten alive by Arms Warriors, to be honest. Like, I never lose versus Fury Warriors. Generally, if you're playing correctly, if we are misplaying, of course we're going to lose. But generally, that matchup, Arms versus Fury, Arms Warrior should win the game, the matchup with equal healers, I would say. Alright, Assassination Rogue. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to add another row. You might hate me, but it is S+. I would even say S++. It's really insane. It's one of, if not the best spec out there. Basically, you're going to win in 2 goes. If they are like trinketing the wrong kidney shot, because you might just kidney shot and do nothing with it, and they trinket it directly, they are dead. If the healer trinkets blind, you know that the next kidney shot is for the healer, and he will die if he has Death Mark or any other, like Kingsbane, for example, or they play the dampening spec with the 4 poisons, and you're going to win over time. Really, really strong. I think if you are not agreeing with me about Assassination Rogue, please let me know. In 2v2, I think Assassination Rogue is also the most played spec with subtlety. So I'm going to show you 2v2. Assassination Rogues in EU, 21k games for a spec that is not the most popular out of them. I think DH is still the most played class. I mean, Demon Hunter, like, as a whole, with Fury Warriors, with Warriors in general. But Rogues have more games in 2v2. And in NA, I don't know. In NA, the same. Also top spec. And that's an indication of the strength of Assassination Rogues in 2s. So for me, although representation is not everything, there is a reason why it is actually overplayed. Before the Shadowlands, the ones that are overplayed were Survival Hunters, for example, or Demon Hunters, or Fury Warriors in Season 4, Season 3. So there is a reason. Assassination Rogue is very strong. 2v2 is really a meta bracket. Above 2k, you do play versus the same specs all over again. You won't see a Frost Mage at 2k generally. You will see Arcane Mages, for example, or you see Assassination Rogues or Demonology Warlocks. But yeah, it's S+. Subtlety Rogue, I think I will have to make some separation, but for me it's like just underneath. It's 2v2. 3v3 is a bit different. It is on the same level. They have ghosts that you cannot really stop, and one shadowy duel can win a game for you. Often than not, you will play with a mage, but you could also play with a holy priest, for example, or disc priest, and still have crazy results. Now you can also play with a preservation evoker, and it's super aggressive as well. So by themselves, they are very strong, and with like specific comps, it just becomes better. It's very hard to actually argue to put them lower. So that's why for me it's an obvious pick for S+ and S. Let's talk about Outlaw Rogues now. Well, Outlaw Rogues, they are also S tier. I think the reason that they are not played, it is because the gameplay is probably not appealing for people. I tried to play Outlaw the other day. I didn't really like it. I do feel that there is damage and potential, but it doesn't matter as long as it's not really liking the spec, then I'm not really playing it. I think people have that as well, especially in a class where you have a lot of choices. If you have a choice between Assassination, Subtlety, and Outlaw, to be honest, it's normal that Outlaw gets less played. It is not tied with power, it's just tied with gameplay and design and people that like to play Assassination regardless, and Subtlety being like a specialized spec. If they have a choice, they would choose Assassination or Subtlety instead of Outlaw. But the pure strength of Outlaw is still S tier. They have Short Blind, They have crazy CC rotations. It's quite of a dampening spec, but you do win in dampening. You can also win in the opener if they are like not really paying attention, but often not, the second or third go is enough to actually win a game with an outlaw rogue. Or you can even wait the second trinket to even then win with a third blind around the 4-minute mark, something like that. You will have your third blind and you will probably win with that. So outlaw rogues, they have some possibilities, and that's why for me it's S tier spec. Let's talk about druids now. Very hard to actually like give a proper rating. I might make enemies there, but I feel like balanced druid is just not a 2v2 spec in general. But also now you don't really have the throughput. You can cheese. You can play also double DPS and it can be your saving grace. You could also still play with Subtlety Rogue and still have success with it. But the tankiness is gone. The damage is also gone. Convoke is doing no damage anymore. Before Convoke, they had like the conduits that actually give more damage whenever you're doing Convoke, and now that's gone. It seems like it's not going to be taken anyways. So I feel like it's D tier. And I won't say that it needs a buff. I think it's very difficult to actually guarantee a series of buff for 2v2, especially for a spec like Balanced Druid. I feel like the design that they're going for on the PTR is not that bad, but I think the placements of the talents are not great, so it becomes a thinking game on which talents you're going to pick to sacrifice to get the better talents, which all the specs have a bit less of that. Whenever I'm picking a talent on my Arms Warrior, basically that talent is useful. There is no real talent where I'm thinking, this talent I'm taking because I need to take the other talents. Often than not, you have value with it, while Balanced Druids have not really the leisure of having that. Feral Druids, S tier. I might even say F+, but it does get countered by a few ratios, a few specs. Preservation Evoker, for example, can just remove your bleeds. So that's very annoying. You win with dampening anyways. You have some great comps. Again, Disc Priest or Holy Priest with a Feral Druid is a S tier comp. You can also play with a Hunter, which is very bursty and very nasty. It's very good. Has mobility, has healing, has tankiness. It's very hard to actually catch. A caster generally will lose versus a Feral Druid because if the healer is CC'd, you just run away. You don't really get a moment on the Feral Druid where you're going to burst for 8 seconds. That's not going to happen. They're just going to run away with it. It's very hard to actually fight with or against a Feral Druid. I don't know, maybe people will say that I'm like judging it a bit less than what it should be. People would put it in S+, for example, but I think with the counters available to it, it's actually very hard to have a guaranteed kill versus a Dark Iron Dwarf or a Dwarf racial, for example. Or, for example, versus an Evoker. It's becoming very hard. And just because of that, they have counters. They do not deserve the S+ god status that an Assassination Rogue has. Because remember, as Assassination Rogues, they can burst, but can also win with dampening very easily, and their bleeds and their poisons are actually very easy to reapply. It's not going to be an auto loss if the dwarf is going to dispel it, right? Of course, Deathmark can get dispelled very easily with a racial, but then it's your job to actually guarantee that they don't really go for the racial. You have a long kidney shot where, for example, Feral Druid, they are not going to stun you to death, for example. Or often they won't stun you to death. Now, let's talk about Resto Druid. I think Resto Druid is probably the best healer in 2s. And I think just because of that, I have to put it in S+. You're going to say, why not Preservation? I think even stats are not going to lie. I'm going to go on Xunamate 2v2, and the most played spec is Restoration Druid, and then Disc Priest, and then Preservation. In NA, in EU, it's still the same, still Restoration, Discipline, and Preservation. Of course, it's a bit unfair from me to say that, because Druids are like a fan favorite class. They have multiple specs, and often than not, if you're playing Battles Druid, you can play Restoration Druid in 2s. But again, Preservation Evokers are overplayed too, so there is maybe a reason. And I think it's not only that, it's also the reason that you can play aggressive as a Resto Druid is that in 2s you have more time, but also you can play more Cyclones. You have God tier comps with a Hunter, for example. You can also make it work with a Rogue, although I think they prefer Priests in general. Affliction Warlock with a Resto Druid is actually very nasty. DH Resto Druid is also nasty. So again, I think in general, Resto Druid is going to be very, very good, and they do deserve the God status, which is S+. Now let's talk about Hunters, and they do fall out of grace since Shadowlands because they don't have Craven Stratagem anymore. Craven Stratagem was a legendary, if you didn't play Shadowlands, that removed everything without a negative thing towards you. So it means if you have an affliction, like an unstable affliction on you, and you have Craven Stratagem, you feign death and you do not get silenced, or you do not get the damage or whatever you can. You can also remove all the bleeds, you can remove all the poisons, you can remove basically everything that is nasty towards you, even the Spear of Bastion. While, for example, now with your Survival Tactics, which is a PvP talent, you cannot remove Spear of Bastion. That's not possible anymore. So you see that there is a bit of differences in 2s how they approach. So now a warrior is not in an auto lose situation versus hunters. They can do well, although it's sometimes very hard. Having double time and heroic leap does help to actually catch up a hunter. And BM Hunters, they are still good, so I'm going to still put it in A tier because they do have God tier comps, they have some nasty setups and nasty consistent damage, but before I could have put it in S plus in Shadowlands. Now it's just falling grace to A tier, and I will put Survivor Hunter in the same status. For me, Survivor Hunter, they are not the God tier 2v2 spec out there, but their comps are God tier. So it has nothing to do with the spec, it has to do with the synergy that they can have with a Resto Druid or even the Holy Priest. They have great burst, they have great consistent damage, but again, they're now very, very squishy, in contrary with in 2v2 in Shadowlands, where you had Craven Stratagem, which is basically the legendary that was taken all the time in 2s. In general, still very good. I think you're going to have still a lot of fun. If I may say so, I think Survivor Hunter and BM are probably very close to S tier. Just depends on how they scale in late game, in a late expansion. I think people are sleeping on BM. I think BM is actually a very good spec. It's a bit sleepy sometimes because you don't really have a lot of buttons, but you still can have wins just because of your existence in that match. It's not like you need to have nasty setups to win. You can also win with just consistent damage and sheer pressure. And yeah, I think it's very strong, very underrated. People just sleep on it, and I might be doing a hot take, but I think BM and Survival are really great in 2s, and in 3s they're not terrible, but that's because they are very, very squishy. MM, I think it's B tier. I think probably better than Fire Mage. The problem is they do get lines. They do get focused, and whenever you get focused, you cannot really do all the things you want to do. CC is a lot more easier with MM now, since you can have Intimidation stun, you have also the Binding Shot stun, you also have Concussive Shot. Excuse me, a Scatter Shot, which can help you to actually set up CC. But you do get focused a lot, and easy too. So that's why B tier. I think if they manage to rework double tap to a way where it's not nocive for the game, but they do get more value just in general, I think it would be better for MMs, especially in 2s, because double tap is pretty much your only win condition whenever you're going to go for a kill. It's not like Shadowlands where you have the legendaries and the sheer pressure and the sheer stats that were given in Season 3 and Season 4, where you could one-shot people. Now, at the moment, one-shotting people, it happens in double tap, and it is easy, predictable, and also lineable, and you can just kite, and still you can have a lot of fun with it. You can still climb with it. That's why it's still good in the good tier. So B tier is the good tier. But again, it's not a survival or a BM hunter, which has a lot of consistent damage, which is actually needed in twos, in my opinion. Devastation Evoker in twos, I think it's quite the same as Boomy, but I think I'm going to put it in the same tier as Distro and Frost Mage, because it's basically the same, really. They're better in trees. They're not god tier in trees, but it do feel like you need a third player to actually enable you to do the damage that you would like to do as an Evoker. You are very, very squishy. You can get killed pretty easily. That's mainly the problem of Evoker. I think also you don't have a lot of buttons. Again, I say that multiple times in multiple videos. But having too little to press makes it very hard to actually balance it out. Either it's going to get busted and you're going to one-shot with just one ability, or you're going to be underwhelming, which is right now, because you don't have a lot of abilities and you get nerfed and your one-shot is nerfed. What you're going to do, because you only have 3 spells to actually press. Well, for example, BM Hunters, they were not really the one-shot master. They had a lot of high consistent damage, and they have buttons to press to actually CC easily, but also escape and turtle and other spells to actually press. It's not only about the damaging spells, it's also the utility side, the defensive side, the I exist side of that class. But in contrary, I think preservation is one of the best specs in the game. I think it's also clear that the developers actually preferred the preservation instead of devastation, because they have more buttons, because the gameplay is more intuitive, because the gameplay is actually more fun. I feel like, again, it's an opinion. I don't feel like devastation is very fun to play. It was very fun to play whenever you could one-shot with fire breath, but that's more because you can one-shot. It is not because of the mechanics that are actually tied to the spec. So I think it's not surprised that I put preservation into the S tier. It's also very hard to actually get with preservation, and that's also very helpful in twos, which is a bracket where you do get Now let's talk about a spec I'm actually a very fan of. The representation is, like, for this example, not really showing the power of the spec. I think the spec is very strong. I think it does a lot of damage. You have the time to do damage in twos. I think you can be very successful with it, and that's why for me it's an 8-tier spec. It's a meta spec. I think people are sleeping on it. I think the buffs towards mana really helped. And on PTR you do get even more utility and CDs and double pain suppression, which is quite big, to be honest. So I think you're going to have a great time if you're maining Disc Priest. I for one, I'm going to make videos about Disc Priest, so if you want to check that out, please subscribe to the channel. But I think the healing, the pain suppression, the barrier that you can put, rupture, you have a lot of actual oh shit buttons to press, which helps. But also participating in kills is actually very needed in twos. You need to do more damage to actually win games. In threes, you can lay back and let your DPS actually do the DPS, right? But in twos, you have more time to actually play the more shadowy side of Disc Priest and have lots of kills because of it. But Holy Priest has the problem is they do get and that's why it's going to be B tier. If you're going to compare Disc Priest with Holy Priest, Disc Priest is actually going to be more mana efficient now, since they did get the buff about mana regen, which is now 5% less in PvP, while before it was 15% less. So now you do get some games where you're winning mana versus preservation invokers, which is quite rare indeed, but still doable. Like for example, Holy Priest, after 3 or 4 minutes, you already and that's probably the biggest problem for Holy Priest. If they didn't go I think it would be a bit higher because they do have utility, they have great PvP talents, they're good versus specific specs, but they lack on that compartment, and also they are a bit in problems since they get the removal of the Kyrian ability that they had. Now they don't have that, so they don't really have a one shot available, and because of that reason, I think it's just a good spec like any other healer. I think in twos, if you need to compare it with DPSs, I think healers in general are more, or at least better in the than other DP, like the other DPSs in that bracket. So that's why for me it's a good spec. But I think if I have to make a healer tier list, it would be probably the most bottom healer of the bunch. Shadow Priest, I'm tempted to put it in S plus because it has insane CC, it has insane damage. It's a lot different from Shadowlands. You're not playing a support anymore. You can play a support, but now you can really carry games because of your damage. But I'm going to put it in S tier. I think it's better than Affliction, better than Arcane. I think it's still a caster, which is very hard to put in S plus. I think it's on the same level as Demonology. They are different, but they kind of operate the same. They do insane damage. They are very tanky. If they play with a healer, it's very hard to actually kill a Shadow Priest. Just in general, because you have a lot of tools to get away with murder. And yeah, I think it's very hard to actually make them look bad because it just is very strong. Shamans. So I'm on the fence on Elemental Shaman because it's very hard to actually judge it. If you're playing versus meaties, it feels like shit. If you're playing versus casters, it feels probably on the same level as Shadow Priest. If you're playing versus like a hybrid comp, it's a bit difficult. If you're playing versus, let's say, Rogue Mage, it becomes super difficult. If you're playing versus a Disc Priest or a Holy Priest, a mind games can just ruin your day because you can't just get one-shotted. So, because of that fact, I'm going to also compare it with Affliction and Arcane, and I think Elemental Shaman is just better than Affliction and worse than Affliction and Arcane. It could be lower A though, so I might change it at the end of the video because I think Fire Mage are not on par with Elemental. I think Elemental is just that much better. But it's very difficult to put Fire Mage on the same level as Destruction because for me, Fire Mage is more easy to play in that bracket. Don't quote me wrong, in that bracket than Destruction Warlock. So just that's where the difficulty lies in the tier list because you're going to think, oh, Elemental Shaman are as strong as Fire Mage, which is not really true. But I think Elemental Shaman is just not as strong as Affliction and Arcane. So I could make a separate bracket for them, like a B+, but I'm not going to do that. You should just think, look, it's upper B or lower A. For me, it's now upper B. Well, for example, Fire Mage, like minus B. So B-, and Elemental Shaman is B+. They have a lot of damage. They have one shots. They can do well. They do get trained very easily, but you have tools to actually run away. In twos, at least. In threes, it's a bit different. You can play a turret and still win, but in twos, you have to kite a bit. You can play double DPS. It's a very fun way to play Elemental Shaman, or you play with a healer and then it's difficult to actually kill Elemental Shaman. So I like it. I think it's strong. So B tier it is. B tier is again a good tier spec. Yeah, good tier spec. So it means that it's actually good. You might think it's average B tier, but it's not. For me, B tier means it's good. Enhancement Shaman in twos. I think it's lower B. I really think it's lower B. I think it's It's underwhelming because damage is good, but you don't have a MS effect. You're squishy, so you have to play with a healer, or you play double DPS with a warrior, and then you just like zug. But the problem is, before you could play with Conqueror's Banner as a warrior, so you could like give more mastery towards the enhancement shaman and the movement speed. But now it's not possible anymore, so that comp is a bit nerfed. I think in general it has damage, but it's cooldown reliant or one-shot reliant, and outside of that you're not going to kill someone. Your self healing is good, but your mana is very low, so you might just do 4 heals and that's it. So all in all, I think it's a good spec, but it's on the same level as a fire mage. It's just there because it's on the verge of being underpowered. So B tier. Frost DK, I think since they did add a lot of ways to actually get your Pillar of Frost very fast, I think it's better than before. I think in Shadowlands I've put Frost DK in C tier and D tier multiple times. Right now it's probably B tier now because you have ways to kill, you have ways to CC, you have ways to actually survive because you can kite. You need to learn to kite as a Frost DK, so just Chain of Ice and then just run around. And when you have your CDs, then you go in. Again, a disarm can ruin you, but they cannot disarm every pillar anymore. You can have a pillar every 40 seconds, every 35 seconds, and then you're going to have a great time. You could also play like a Frost Strike, Howling Blast build, which is kind of good, but it's a bit dampening. You need to win probably late game. You will not win the first pillar go, but you can make it work. So for me, it's a B tier spec. Unholy DK. Oh, excuse me. Resto Shaman first. Resto Shaman for me is one of the best healers out there. It's also A tier, probably ahead of Disc Priest. The only reason why it's not S tier because they get trained, they can die, and it's very difficult for them to survive. But your Stormkeepers, your damage is what makes Resto Shaman actually very strong in twos. It feels like a double DPS comp. It feels like you can win games basically because you have Stormkeepers, and that's actually a very neat thing. I think Lightning Lasso is also very strong, and you can cross CC very easily. After you have Lightning Lasso up, you can just root them and then do a Hex, and it's very hard to actually like escape that. A Disc Priest or Holy Priest can just Shadow Word Death to get out of Hex, but it could be a mind game and they just Shadow Word Death into nothing and then get hexed. Again, a very strong spec, and I expect Resto Shaman to be more played in twos. Just at the moment it is not very strong in solo shuffle, and in 3v3 depends about the comps. Shadow play is very good with the Resto Shaman, for example. But yeah, it's a difficult time for Resto Shaman because you can be very good in twos, you can also be very good in threes, but then in solo shuffle you do feel squishy because dampening is kicking way too fast. Your healing tide is healing nothing. It gets broken very easily too. So I don't know what they could add to actually make Resto Shaman better. I think on the PTR you do get healing tide buffed. So maybe the PvP talent will be gone, or it will be still there, and then you will heal for a ton. And we will see what they are going to do with Resto Shaman on 10.0.5. Now let's talk about Unholy DK. Unholy DK is definitely better than Frost DK. So for me it's A tier. It's still a DK spec. You might think it's S tier, but again, a melee can eat an Unholy DK very easily. It has counters. I think hunters are doing very well versus DKs in my opinion. Assassination rogues can win versus a Unholy DK very easily once IBF is down. It's actually very easy to kill a DK. So for me, it is A tier. I could put it higher, but I think the other specs are just better than Unholy DK. Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter. So, Havoc. I might be biased. I think it's S tier. I think probably S minus. It's very strong. You have some comps or versus who you're going to play is actually a very big auto win. Versus some comps you're going to lose very hard, like let's say a survival hunter or BM hunter or even an MM, they can still trap you and you have nothing to get out of it. So you have some bad matchups. That's why it's not S plus, and that's why it's S minus. It could be even A, because they do have some bad matchups. A rogue can also just ruin you too, because outside of blur you have nothing. You have to play auto blur probably to survive the damage if you're stunned. I think darkness is a very good CD, but it is still very random. And yeah, I think casters, they are going to have a nightmare versus you though, so that's why it's S tier. I think versus a few melees you're going to do well, and then versus a few melees you're going to do very bad. For example, Windwalker, they are going to destroy you normally if they're doing well. And yeah, S tier. I think it's good. It's very good. Let's talk about Holy Paladin and Retribution Paladin, and then Monks as last. Holy Paladin, I think it's on par with Holy Priest. I think they are not good. They lack the actual throughput, but also they lack the actual CDs to actually use. In twos, if you're playing versus a caster, you're going to have a bad time because Bob doesn't do anything. Your ultimate sacrifice is good, it's fun, but if the people are aware of it, they are going to destroy you very quickly. 1 minute sack is good, so you have that. Bob is also very good versus melees, but you don't always play versus melees. You do lose on mana all the time, so after 3 or 4 minutes you will have no mana and then you will lose automatically pretty much. So you have to win those games very fast, so it will be very fast games or very annoying games because you're going to be all in all, I think it's not really a very strong spec into. So, excuse me, I had my phone, which is very annoying. Now Retribution Paladin, I think it's on the same level as Enhancement Shaman. They're wheelchair-y. They are yeah. I think it's very hard for them to score kills outside of burst. I think all the classes have the same problem. Outside of burst, you don't really have like kill potential, but I think paladins are even worse. I think they will have to run away outside of their burst. There's no reason to stay in combat, to be honest. They have CDs, but again, it's limited. They don't have a lot of damage reduction, or at least they don't have damage reduction. They do have some offensive capacities that are going to be very good versus a few specs, but then you're playing versus an assassination rogue and then you have to divine shield very quickly, or you're playing like a rogue mage and basically your divine shield is going to be popped first second of the game. You have to play with a healer, you can make it work, but 2v2 wasn't the best bracket in general for Red 3, but in Dragonflight it's even worse, I think. Evokers are uncatchable for you. You don't even have to think to actually go for the Evoker because that's not possible. I think Devastation destroys Retribution Paladins in general because, again, Hover, too strong. You're going to get kited most of the time. And yeah, I think Retribution Paladin, they do need a buff somehow, some way. I think they can nerf the offensive capacities, but they have to buff somewhere else, give more mobility to Retribution Paladin. Like I said, Retribution Paladin and even Enhancement Shaman, they have a design from Cataclysm in a game that has lots of mobility in Dragonflight. It's not possible. Even DKs have more mobility than Retribution Paladin effectively. So yeah, it is what it is. Mistweaver Monks, I think it's the third best healer, to be honest. It's very safe. You can play Fist Weaving, basically winning games by punching people. Very strong. They have good CDs, good capacities to actually do damage and healing. For once, at least in twos, you can play aggressive. In threes, is a bit different, but in twos, at least you're going to have a great time. And if I have my top 3 healing specs in my mind, it would be Resto, Druid, Preservation, and then Mistweaver. And you can just switch them depending on the comps you're playing. If you're a Mistweaver and you're playing versus casters, you're going to do a great time because you have revival, you have cocoon, you have the leisure to actually run away very easily because of the pillar. So, and versus melees, you will have more difficult time. So that's why it's interchangeable. Resto Druid will do very good versus melees, but a bit worse versus casters. And Mistweaver will do very good versus casters, but a bit less versus melees, for example. So you see a bit the point. Windwalkers, they're good. I think it's 8 here. They have one-shot potential. They can just one-tap you. It needs to play like a stability rogue, so you have to run away at times. But it is what it is. You have to understand that, and you're going to be good to go whenever that happens. So this is pretty much my tier list. I didn't really tell that much about Windwalker because I think it's straightforward. You do win games because of your damage, and then you lose games because you are very squishy, and that's why it's meta, but it's not like God tier. And that is pretty much my explanation behind Windwalkers. So what do you think about my tier list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you enjoy it to be very long, because again, I think regrouping all the archetypes together is maybe the way forward for my channel in tier lists, because I feel like separating healers, melees, and range is good. I would say for the views, because again, I will have triple the views, but I think it's more enjoyable for the viewer to actually watch everything in the same time, so you can have a good experience. You have all the information layout directly, and I think it's better also for you guys to actually enjoy the videos like this. So thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet, and we will catch each other very soon in a next video. Have a great day. Bye.